Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the Improvement Podcast. So in this episode I'm going to dive into another Q&A. So I believe 2 episodes ago I did dive into Q&A prior, but I had some leftover questions that I didn't get the chance to answer, so I thought I'd create another episode going over them. So first of all, the first question is, when someone wants to tone their body, how do they go about doing so? What basically achieves having a toned physique, a toned look? And the answer to this question is just basically building muscle tissue and losing weight. So when it comes to what contributes towards being toned, it's just having more muscle. It's ultimately going to make you look more shaped, it'll make you look leaner, it'll make you look like you've got more definition. Like someone who has a good amount of muscle in their frame is gonna look leaner than someone with not a lot of muscle, even if they've got the same body fat percentage. So yeah, just simply getting more muscle on your frame and then getting leaner. And of course, when going about this, if let's say you've not trained before, then you can definitely achieve that just sitting at maintenance, not purposely dieting, not purposely bulking, just literally maintaining your body weight and getting into training, trying to have an appropriate amount of protein. However, if you are more advanced in your training, if you've been training for a good while, then it might be a better idea going into purposeful dieting phases and gaining phases and repeating that process, just because when you sit at maintenance, you somewhat maintain your physique. You're not in the best position to build muscle. You're not in the best position to lose body fat. So that's why you ideally want to dedicate yourself to one phase or another accordingly, just so you ensure you're not spinning your wheels. You're actually going to be progressing during that period, because you obviously don't want to waste your time. So yeah, hope that helped. Whoever asked the question, they had like a follow-up question, and it was, see if you are in the position where you want to kind of tone your body, would it be beneficial to have a high protein intake? And in terms of what else they asked is obviously what type of training would be best, and this I've kind of covered just in that question I just answered there pretty much. But if, let's say, regardless of if your goal's to build muscle, get leaner, I'd say like having a relatively high protein intake is going to be beneficial for many reasons. If, let's say, you want to get leaner, having high protein intake will ensure you retain muscle tissue. It will ensure you minimize hunger. You burn more calories consuming foods with high protein than, let's say, carbohydrates and fats, the other food groups. So there's never really a downside for having a high protein intake. The only caveat to that is if your protein intake's so high, that means you're not getting enough carbohydrates and enough fats, then that is going to be detrimental. But most people, I don't think, will be in that range, even if they consciously always try to get a high protein intake in, so I wouldn't worry about that. But a good amount to aim for when it comes to your protein intake is having round about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. That will get you just above kind of the recommendation and just ensure you've definitely got enough per meal and you've definitely got enough a day. And then if you set that goal for yourself at the start of a gaining phase, that's going to take into account if, let's say, you are building muscle tissue during that period, so you don't need to consistently like adjust your protein goal and adjust the amount of kind of, let's say, chicken you're eating, that sort of thing. So yeah, 2 grams per kilogram and keeping that pretty static. Obviously, if someone's, let's say, pretty overweight, let's say they're carrying a lot of excess body fat, then they might want to consider not quite having 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, because if, let's say, someone's, let's say they're 140 kilos, then that's not all going to be muscle tissue, so their protein requirements aren't going to be double that, aren't going to require 280 grams of protein a day to maintain muscle and build muscle. So they could get away with just kind of roughly estimating how much kind of muscle they have. So you could just fire yourself on like the higher end, like I said, for its hunger benefits, for its benefits in terms of burning more calories and helping you build muscle tissue. So just maybe 200 grams or something for someone in that boat. And again, it might be a bit over than what they need, but there's little downside of doing so. And they're probably going to be able to diet on quite high calories just due to the nature of their current body weight. So I don't think that's anything to stress about. And in terms of, obviously, if you're in a calorie surplus, then the protein requirements stay pretty similar. You don't quite need as much And something to consider as well is you'll also get like indirect protein sources. So indirect protein sources are things like things from like protein from bagels, rice, oats, ones that aren't whole protein sources that don't contain all the amino acids we need to kind of build muscle, to fully spike muscle protein synthesis and have all the essential amino acids to go about the muscle building process. And when it comes to like if this matters, if you're not getting those whole proteins, I used to think it does matter an awful lot, and you definitely need to have X amount from, let's say, chicken, etc. If you want to maybe maximise things, I'd still be on the safe side and do so. But I have listened to quite a few podcasts and listened to quite credible individuals in the industry talk about the fact that when studies kind of have a look at the effects of maybe getting protein from trace sources, things like, I think it was rice in a study in comparison to like whey, the outcome was pretty similar in terms of the amount of muscle gained. So you might not need to worry about it, but if you want to be on the safe side, just ensure with each meal you're getting around about 20 grams of at least protein from like a whole food source, like a chicken, eggs, mince, something like that, or whey protein. And I think that's going to put you in a good spot. And yeah, when you're obviously in a gaining phase as well, you're going to get more of those other protein sources which will add to your protein. So you might want to get a wee bit lower, just because see if you're sitting at like 200 grams of protein plus, then you have all the other protein sources from the other food, then your appetite might dwindle. So that could be a place to kind of lower your protein intake. And in terms of what like training is best to go for if your goal is to tone your body. So like I kind of said, it's just about kind of building muscle tissue and then having a low enough body fat to look toned. So it's going to be kind of weight training. And usually for most individuals, I'd recommend weight training if their goal is to look better, and I'd recommend kind of maxing that out. And the reason being is, if let's say you want to look better, your time's better spent lifting weights than it is, let's say, being on the treadmill or being on a cross trainer or any other sort of cardio equipment, or just doing a ton of steps, because you're going to get more bang for your buck from it. When you build more muscle tissue, like I said, it'll contribute towards you looking better, but also you burn more calories the more muscle tissue you have. So typically 99% of the time, unless enjoyment is a deciding factor, I'd recommend people kind of focus more so on weight training if their goal is fat loss. So next question is, what exercise do I see butchered the most in the gym? Quite a tricky one. There's quite a few that people can butcher without putting people down. It would maybe be just like a lat pull down. I think a lot of people have like excessive torso momentum. They don't know where to kind of pull the attachment and to bias what they're trying to train, if that makes sense. Like back as a whole is like a really complex movement, or not movement, sorry, a really complex body part to train, so it would probably be that, to be honest. And maybe also lateral raises, because just due to the nature of lateral raises, they're really easy at the bottom, really hard at the top. Typically when an exercise is like that, you are more prone to cheat on the exercise or to use momentum to make up for where it's hard and where it's easy, and to make it a bit easier to kind of complete each rep. So probably a lateral raise. So if you're doing a lateral raise, make sure when you're performing it, to target your side delts, you keep your palms facing down. You don't allow them to lift up. You keep your chest somewhat down, or not down, just kind of, you keep your core tight and you don't flare your rib cage. You don't flare your chest when you're performing it, which can shift that load onto your front delts. And as well as that, you're driving out and forward slightly. That's the goal. And when we're performing it, we don't want any bend in the elbow joint. And typically doing any sort of movement, if moving, let's say, a joint doesn't contribute towards kind of training that desired body part, then you shouldn't move it. Another example is if you're doing the lateral raise, what we're concerned about is what's happening at the shoulder joint. So there's no kind of purpose of having any bend in your knees and extension in your knees, or basically kind of changing what's happening with your legs, or changing what's happening in regards to your chest, etc. You should keep it relatively static. So Next question is, what podcasts do I listen to myself? So I listen to quite a lot of podcasts in my spare time. A few of them being J3 University, which is one more orientated around bodybuilding, the Revive Stronger podcast, 3DMJ podcast. What else do I listen to? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I've not kind of took notes for the podcast. I'm just kind of like just rambling off the top of my head. Pro Coach, they have a podcast as well. I believe that's kind of all the main ones I listen to. The Renaissance Periodization podcast, and just pretty much, they're pretty much the main ones. Prescript podcast as well. I listen to quite a lot in my spare time, like I said, so it's a great way to kind of get more knowledge in while you're on the go, eating meals, etc. So yeah, they're a few of my favourites off the top of my head. In terms of the next question, so I'm going to touch on what warm-up routine you should potentially do pre-workout. So when we're thinking about what the role is of warming up before a session, it is basically, when I'm thinking about what to do to a warm-up, it is we're wanting to just get our body temperature up, get some blood in that target musculature that we're going to be using. So just simply warming up the body, as the name suggests, but also that it's a time you can not just warm up the body, but do so in a strategic manner. So when you're warming up, you're also improving things like your mobility and your ability to maybe stabilize certain muscles. And what I mean by that is, instead of just warming up for legs, just going on a treadmill or Stairmaster for 5 minutes, I think that time's much better spent using it to maybe do some dynamic stretching, to do some maybe walking lunges, and like I do this movement where like I balance on one leg and then like a single leg kind of RDL, if that makes sense. That's kind of the easiest way to describe it on video. Like if we use warm-ups and we also kind of achieve something apart from warming up our body, then it's going to be a more efficient use of our time. And having like greater stability, having greater mobility, and being able to kind of balance better in different ranges of motion, in my opinion, is going to prevent injury and also allow you to get more out of your lifts. The reason being is, like, if we're more stable, we can produce more force. So if we can work on our stability while getting our heart rate up, while getting our body temperature up, then that's going to be a win, in my opinion. That's going to be a better use of our time. And also, if we can improve our mobility during warm-ups, areas like, we'll stick to legs just to stay in the same kind of topic. So when it comes to legs, for example, if you can improve your mobility so that you can get better range of motion when it comes to performing a squat variation, then that's going to allow you to take your quad for a larger range of motion. It's going to allow you to get more bend in your knee, and it's going to allow you to maybe get your knee further over your toe, which will ultimately allow you to target your quad more effectively, leading to better results when it comes to your training. So yeah, typically I recommend, even if like your warm-up doesn't need to be kind of the most optimal thing ever, you don't like need to do a certain thing, but just use your initiative with it. Like, but what I'd say is you could probably do better than just walking on a treadmill and then jumping on the first piece of kit. Like, if you might as well use that time to your advantage and kind of do something that's going to actually be a bit more productive. And nobody can, like, when I'm getting to the gym, like, I can't be bothered messing about warming up for 10-15 minutes, mincing about on the floor and doing all these certain exercises. So what I typically do is, depending on what session it is, I'll warm up in between my sets. So for example, when I'm training legs, I start off with calves, so I'll basically do some dynamic stretching, some kind of mobility work, you could say, and some foam rolling in between my warm-ups and more working sets when it comes to calves. And same when I'm on like my second and sometimes third movement, just because it's not going to take away from my ability to perform, and it's going to allow me to just save time. Because like if you've got a session that's 2 hours, you're focused on that, you're thinking about the kind of the lifts you want to perform and the maybe numbers you want to hit. You don't want to kind of spend that time mincing her out beforehand. So I like to do it in between my working sets and in between my warm-ups for my like first few movements. So next up, we have the next question on, if you're training 5 times a week and your goal is to bring up more so your lower body, what split? This guy's asking basically, what split should he do? Should he do an upper lower rest, push pull legs, rest split? or upper lower, upper rest, upper lower. Basically, should he do an upper lower split or an upper lower push pull leg split if he wants to bring up primarily his lower body? So obviously something to consider and to get out of the way is enjoyment. So if, let's say, you love one kind of split more than the other, then you could consider doing the split you enjoy more, because adherence is something massively important. And if you absolutely love your training, if you're buzzing to get to the gym every day and train, then that's going to make a massive difference in your effort and your overall consistency over the long term and your ability to get results. So that's something to consider. Which one do you potentially fancy best? Something important to realise is when it comes to kind of training splits, a training split is just a way of getting volume in. So there's nothing special about upper lower, push pull legs, a bro split, any training split. Obviously you can maybe consider the finer details and doing so in a way to get the most results possible, but your training split's just a way of getting volume in for the week. What I mean by that is, it might not matter. Like, see if you're doing a upper lower split or a push pull leg split, what matters is how much sets have you got for your pulling musculature. Because if the number of sets is equated during, let's say, an upper lower split and a push pull leg split for maybe your back, then you're going to get maybe similar results for your back. I hope that makes sense. So basically, like, what matters most is how much kind of volume we're doing throughout the week, and a split is just a effective and a convenient way of getting that amount of volume in a way you can recover in between your sessions. What I mean by that is, obviously, we don't want to train upper every day, or we don't want to train body parts back to back. We want to space them out relatively even, ideally. But yeah, that's all a split kind of does. So once you realise that, then you become less attached to doing a certain split, etc. However, in terms of what I'd recommend, so if you're wanting to bring up your lower body, then I'd maybe consider doing obviously on paper, if you're doing, the question was actually upper body. They want to bring up their upper body. The same applies in regards to what I've just answered. But obviously what you can consider as well is, like, if you are doing push pull legs and then upper lower, what that basically means is you've got more attention for your smaller body parts. What I mean by that is, if, let's say, you are doing push and pull, at the end of your session you can dedicate a bit more time towards arm work, can dedicate a bit more time towards maybe side delt work for push and rear delt work for pull, and doing things like calves and abs on legs, obviously, but that obviously the leg session is going to remain pretty similar. So what I'd recommend is, if you are just starting out, then I'd recommend doing the upper lower variation. Whereas this individual, I think he is a bit more experienced, I would recommend doing the push pull legs upper lower, because I feel like when you've got an upper lower split, it can leave gaps in your physique, because you're so toast from doing those big main compound lifts that by the time you get them done, you've not got much energy to give towards a smaller muscle group. So if you are more experienced, push pull legs probably would be a good idea. But like I said, it does come down to enjoyment massively. That's something that you can't neglect the importance of. And the reason why I say when you get more experience then do the push pull leg split is, if you're just starting out, you're not going to be that fatigued from doing upper because your overall strength isn't that high. Whereas if, let's say someone ridiculously strong goes in and they tries to train upper, and they're bent over rowing 200 kilos or 180 or whatever, they are doing a flat press variation with 4 plates on a bench press, let's say, and then they're doing a big shoulder press, and then they're doing like a lat pull down with the full stack, and then they're doing lateral raises with 20 kilos. Like, that's going to be a lot more fatiguing than if you're doing a quarter of that weight, which means the movements at the end of the session the quality of them is going to be lower. So that's something to consider. So hope that can answer the question and that helped. So next up, the next question is, should you weigh out your food? The asker asked specifically rice, should you weigh it out cooked or raw? And when it comes to how you should weigh out your food, just keep it consistent. That's what matters most. And the reason being is, if, let's say, you're doing it the exact same way every single day, then it doesn't really matter because you're going to be consuming the same amount, if that makes sense. What matters more is, or what will matter is if you're changing it. And what I mean by that is like changing the method, weighing it raw 1 week, weighing it cooked 1 week, because then it could be potentially a bit off, a bit kind of inaccurate. So I recommend just sticking to the same manner of it. And obviously, like, the reason being is if I had to say which one's best, and what I personally do is I weigh out everything raw. The reason being is the duration you're cooking something for and the duration you are maybe letting something soak for is going to influence the weight of it. What I mean by that is rice, for example. How much water you add to your rice is going to influence the cooked weight of your rice. And if you, let's say, cook chicken for longer, it's gonna like remove the juices further, and it's gonna be a lower actual weight after cooking it. So I recommend weighing it raw for that reason. And something to also consider as well is if, let's say, you, just for convenience, what I do with my chicken, and it is still accurate, is I will put in, I'm just going to say a kilo just for ease of explaining this. Let's say I put in a kilogram of chicken, I cook that in the air fryer at once, right? Then I just know whatever the cooked weight is, if I divide that by 10, that's going to give me 100 grams worth of raw weight, if that makes sense, after draining the juices. So that's how I do it personally. It's so much more convenient and so much quicker if you can kind of bulk cook it and then just divide the weight by how much servings you want. So yeah, but whatever's going to allow you to stick to it best, and you can keep track of overtime's key, obviously. But yeah, I recommend doing it raw if you want to make sure it's as accurate as possible. For example, like during my contest prep, and like every calorie matters to some extent because of how lean I'm trying to get. If you're just trying to lose a bit of weight or roughly maintain how you are body weight wise, you might not even have to track. Whereas if I'm trying to be super accurate and get all my body fat off, as much of it as I can, then I'd want to be as accurate as possible. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you very much for watching, and if you do have any questions or any questions that you want to see in any future Q&A episodes, let me know, and I'll keep note of all of them for next time I go about doing a Q&A. I'll probably do these relatively regularly. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy it, then please feel free to show any form of support through subscribing, leaving a rating review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, and leaving a comment and liking the video if you're watching on or listening on YouTube. So yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and I'll see you in the next episode.